Guys. We are going to do our notes for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and slash Monday classes. I'm not quite sure what we'll do with those, but we'll get to that when I feel like getting to it. So start here. Some of you have noticed this is just a Lincoln quote. I'm not going to read it to you, but this goes with the assignment that you guys have, and it's posted again here. Right here under 422, 423. The notes will be in this lovely blank space here once I've uploaded them. And then the document analysis link is here. You'll have the same thing in Canvas here, where basically you have to go through, read this slide, the quotes by Lincoln in the debate with Stephen Douglas, and answer those 4 questions. That is your assignment for this week. If you've done it, which 4 of you have already, great. If you have not, please make sure that gets done by Monday for like full credit and those kinds of things as we go forward. So with that, I'm going to skip 2 said Lincoln and Douglas debates for our couple slides that we have. So the Lincoln Douglas debate, Abraham Lincoln here, Stephen Douglas here. They're actually going for the Senate position in Illinois. Yes, they will run against one another in 1860, but we're not there yet. So this is for the Illinois Senate position. They meet over a series of debates 7 times. The topics range on a lot of things. A lot of them, though, center around race, slavery, and the expansion of slavery. Lincoln, being more of the Republican, is pretty much adamant that it should not be expanded, that we should get rid of slavery where it does not already exist. It's fine in the South, but we should not have any more in the territories, new states. Stephen Douglas is the champion of popular sovereignty, so he's much more of that idea, especially as a Democrat. He kind of has to do something to appease the Southern Democrats. It's not really his base, but he has to do something to win over people on that side. And so he's really big on that, allow the people to choose. As they go through, I mean, both Douglas and Lincoln are actually fairly similar people. Again, Douglas, for the most part, kind of behind the scenes, didn't like slavery, but wouldn't openly admit it because he knew if he did, it would kill his chances to win as a Democrat, because Democrats relied so much on Southern support. Even in Illinois, there were enough people, since Illinois is kind of right on that, the border states, it's Missouri too. It's left as a slave state. Kentucky is one of those border states that has slavery just to its south, so it's in kind of a precarious position. Lincoln would come right out and talk about how he didn't like slavery, though. That's really the key difference between these 2 men. So they have all these debates. Lincoln does very, very well, but actually doesn't win the Senate position. Stephen Douglas does. But as you see kind of the last bullet there, I mean, the big thing this does is it pushes the debates are so well spoken of and pressed forward that they really go through and kind of raise Lincoln's stature. That also, and this is not just some random guy from Illinois, the Republicans kind of see him and say, hey, this is somebody that maybe we could build up to be a candidate for president in 1860, which is obviously what they do. Douglas is also kind of hurt the debate. Yes, he wins the Senate position, but he gets real kind of wishy-washy on some key issues. The Freeport Doctrine that you see there, it doesn't really, again, help his base of Democrats who want to see him be a little bit more on the side of slavery is what they would like, since that's mostly the Democratic position of things. So that's where we are with 1858. We go to 1860. Lincoln is the nominee. And if you watch the crash course video, which you should have, I mean, it's a really, really good thing. It talks all about the election of 1860, why it's arguably one of the most important elections that we've had in our nation's history. It also does a really good job of talking about not just some of the things that we talk about this week, but also some of the things we talked about before break, all of those causes kind of leading up to the Civil War. He does a really good job of bringing all that together, like John Green usually does. So the sentiment in the South is already that if the Republicans win, that they should go back and start thinking about secession again. They viewed that abolitionists and Republicans were all fanatical lunatics and mass murderers like John Brown. This is right after the raid on Harper's Ferry, which you read about with those documents before break, with John Brown and all of his dealings and influence, certainly on the Civil War. But Democrats know if they want to beat the Republicans that they have to be unified. They realize that Stephen Douglas is their best chance to have anybody win votes in the North, but he becomes very, very unpopular in the South. And so you have quite a few states break off, and you see now a Northern Democrat and a Southern Democratic candidate be put forward. And so Vice President John Breckinridge for James Buchanan is going to be pushed as a nominee by these Southern Democrats to go and challenge Lincoln. But a lot of the Democrats in the border states and North want to keep Douglas because they don't feel that Breckinridge has a legitimate chance, since it's too much of a Southern ideology there. I mean, his big thing is they want to make sure that, slavery continues to expand and all that. And you're really playing along these whole North-South lines. So, and so, a question that I would have asked you guys if you were all in front of me on a normal kind of day is, there are a lot of people that argue that that's, some people would look at this and say this is detrimental to Douglas. It splits the party. He's losing votes, but it actually, you could argue, helps Stephen Douglas, because now he doesn't have to go to Southern states where he knew that he was disliked. He knew that he had to go and defend positions that he didn't want to have to defend, because he didn't necessarily want to see the expansion of slavery. He wanted to go to popular sovereignty. So the idea could be that, well, the people voted and that's why we aren't expanding slavery, because it's the people's will. Whereas if he went and represented Democrats in Mississippi and Alabama and those places in the South, he would have to go through and say, okay, we're all for expansion of slavery. And that's not something Stephen Douglas believed in. So it allowed him to really refine his message and stay true to what he believed in. He didn't have to go and campaign and try to set himself up and look bad in places and say things to appease certain bases that could come back and hurt him in other parts of the country. So, so the election goes through 1860. For the most part, it is Lincoln versus Douglas in the North, and it is John Breckinridge. And then John Bell is another person who's put up. He's a constitutional unionist. We haven't talked about that party because they're really insignificant. And so you're really a footnote here. So don't worry about like, oh my gosh, I don't know this party. You don't need to. Lincoln wins. As you can see, he dominates the northern states. You can also see he doesn't win a single state south of Maryland and what we call kind of the Mason-Dixon line. And in some states in the Deep South, Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot. They refused to put a Republican candidate on there because they knew that Republicans were anti-slavery. And so, Southerners are outraged, obviously. But as we talked about in the North, so many people are fed up with Buchanan and the Democrats. They completely bailed on the North during the Depression of 1857 and left these people high and dry when they needed it most economically. A lot of people also see all of these events, Dred Scott and other things, as this slave block power that is in Washington, that they feel that they need to do something or else the United States is going to become a slave nation or a slave owning nation. And that is obviously something that most Americans don't want, at least certainly in the North. So the idea gets tossed around again about secession. I need to move my thing so I can go. I know that's awkward. Was making sure that I didn't miss any slides. Sorry, it's super professional, as is my hat. My hair's out of control. Sorry. So we look to secession. So you have people in the South. Reasons why, not everyone is unified. And as we've talked, the South is not a homogenous state. There are key differences within each state. Each state is different to the next as far as how they view slavery, how they view the Union, all of these things. The big four reasons as to why they should not secede. First and foremost, Lincoln from the get-go says that he will not interfere with slavery where it already exists. He's only concerned about expansion. So if you go back and look at the map we had here, Some of that is talking about Kansas, Nebraska. Some of that is looking at these areas, one in the Mexican secession from the Mexican-American War, Utah, New Mexico, what will be Arizona. Lincoln is very much in the idea of kind of what we talked before with the whole Wilmot Proviso about slavery will not be expanded. So, yes, that's not something that people in the South want to hear, but Lincoln's not saying that we're going to look and start making laws to outlaw slavery where it already exists. For the most part, Democrats control both houses of Congress, so it's very difficult for the president to pass a whole lot if he doesn't have congressional support. We certainly see those dynamics over the last 15, 20 years about what all of that looks like. When you have executive and parts of the legislature divided, if that happened, the fugitive slave law certainly would become null and void, and that's a huge issue for a lot of people in the South. If they didn't have that, then slaves that were freed or freed themselves and escaped, there was no way to get them back. So they couldn't go through. They wouldn't be allowed to run and search for them in the North any longer. And more than likely, the last one's obviously kind of the duh statement there is secession is probably going to mean civil war. So most Southerners, we've looked a lot at the northern side of it. They felt this was this big slave conspiracy. Most Southerners feel like they're just innocent and this is just Northern aggression. They're being tired or told what to do, and this is how you're supposed to live your life, blah, blah, blah. They feel annoyed and outraged that they're not getting their fair share of lands in the West. They feel that Lincoln is a lot like John Brown, and you had a lot of these other people kind of view the John Browns as the normal and not the exception for Republicans in the North. And you had this group of men, mostly men, known as the Fire Eaters. And these were people that had already won. This is the John C. Calhouns who've been talking about secession for the last 20 years. Now all of a sudden see that there's division, and now is kind of your opportunity to capitalize and strike. So secession, again, it's a giant risk. Not every state feels very strongly about this. And again, as I said, there are tensions within states between small farmers and large plantation owners. Large plantation owners certainly were much more for this. They had, more to lose, certainly with losing some of their slaves and whatnot. For the small farmers, did they really want to? They could potentially be the ones being sent to war since they didn't have large estates and wealth that could get them out of fighting. And so they were going to be the ones that would be shipped off to die, and when they didn't necessarily have as big a say in the cause. It's also difficult to organize a formal policy of, how are we going to do this? When are we going to do this? We saw in 1832 that South Carolina tried it, failed. We looked at the whole Nashville Convention, 1850, where ideas were talked about organization, and that completely fell apart and was a complete disaster. And so the South still remembers that, and they realize that if we're going to do this, then it has to be collective. It has to be done right. But 1861, South Carolina is the first to go. As we know, they secede. And as congressmen from the South, then start to serve as liaisons to other Southern states, you have others will follow suit. And you see the states there, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all decide to secede next in kind of the next wave. Yes, there are key states missing there. Most notably ours. We're going to be one of the last ones to kind of go and join the Confederacy. But for early 1861, these are the 7 that are going to go and start things. Obviously, in the North, this is just yet another sign of the slave power conspiracy. Not getting the thing. They're not getting their way, and so they're just now going to take their ball and go. We'll just start our own country. In the North, obviously, they don't think they can do that. And so secession is starting, and next week we'll look at Fort Sumter and the actual start of the war and start getting into those kind of key details. So as always, if you have questions, I know I asked with the form. I don't want to necessarily do a form every week. I know those can be redundant. So if you have questions, send me things through the Remind, send me things. I'll try to have weekly meetings like we will tomorrow or today. Well, tomorrow morning, today, whenever you're watching this, where you can ask questions and we can have kind of Q&A sessions. That's kind of going to be our class time. So that's it. Bye, guys. Miss you. Have a good one.